we're going to jump off here. There's Bridget. Let me get her in here. Cousin It said she's going to be a little late. So, Bridget, you have the responsibility of letting me know when she gets in. And we're going to get started. We've got a lot to cover, and I am going to use as many days as necessary because, again, this is foundational to the rest of Asia, and very important. It also, as I described yesterday, sets the tone for where we went after World War II, because this is basically the first jumping off point, and the use of these terror tactics. We talked a little bit yesterday about the U.S. Army being in Korea even prior to the actual quote unquote war, because they were basically the forces, just like we were in Northern Africa. We were in Japan as an occupying force in the immediate aftermath of World War II, under the guise of, pushing out the Japanese and making sure they left town. At least that's what we were told. And we talked a little bit about yesterday that part of it was given to the Soviets and part of it was given to the US, just like had happened with the sectors in Europe. And that's not uncommon to have that, because after all, we were allies. So the Soviets were given the northern sector, the US was given the southern sector, and that's kind of the way it was set up. So then what we learned is that there is CIA people present in South Korea. There is also guerrilla forces being trained by the army and the US was trying to install into the presidency of all of Korea, because he was bought and paid for by the West. Kim Il-sung wasn't having any of it. He was very popular in the North, and he wanted to have one election for the entire country. Well, of course, that didn't fit into the plans because the U.S. wouldn't be in control and they wouldn't risk allowing Kim Il-sung to be that one president. And again, I described yesterday, the North was much more advanced as far as industry and economy, where the South was very agrarian, very rural farms, that type of thing. They had bigger cities, but they were not as advanced, and the living standard was not the same as in the North. So just want to set that tone because that's where we left off yesterday. And we're going to finish up William Bloom's Killing Hope chapter on Korea, 1945 to 1953. And then we're going to jump to several articles and some CIA declassified documents that's going to blow your mind. All right. So in the words of the Yale psychiatrist Robert Lifton, brainwashing was popularly held to be, quote, all-powerful, irresistible, unfathomable, and magic method of achieving total control over the human mind, unquote. Although the CIA experimented beginning in the 1950s to develop a magic, neither they nor the North Koreans or Chinese ever possessed it. The agency began behavior control and mind control experiments on human subjects using drugs and hypnotics in Japan in July 1950, shortly after the beginning of the Korean War. In October, they apparently used North Korean prisoners as subjects as well. In 1975, a U.S. Navy psychologist, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut, revealed that his naval work included establishing how to induce servicemen who may not be naturally inclined to kill to do so under certain circumstances. He referred to these men using the words hitman and assassin. Narut added that convicted murderers, as well as those released from military prisons, to become assassins. Brainwashing, said the Army study, quote, has become a catchphrase used for so many things that it no longer has any precise meaning. A precise meaning is necessary in this case, unquote. Now, this entire thing is part of this Army doctrine regarding brainwashing. The prisoners, as far as Army psychiatrists have been able to discover, were not subject to anything that could properly be called brainwashing. Indeed, the communist treatment of prisoners, while it came nowhere near fulfilling the requirements of the Geneva Convention, rarely involved outright cruelty, being instead a highly novel blend of leniency and pressure. The communists rarely used physical torture, and the Army has not found a single verifiable case in which they used it for the specific purpose of forcing a man to collaborate or to accept their convictions, unquote. According to the study, however, some American airmen of the 90 or so who were captured were subjected to physical abuse in an attempt to extract confessions about germ warfare. This could reflect either a greater communist resentment about the use of such a weapon or the need to produce some kind of corroboration of a false or questionable claim. American servicemen were also subjected to political indoctrination by their jailers. The Chinese communists, of course, did not invent this practice. During the American Civil War, prisoners of both the North and South received indoctrination about the respective merits of the other side. And in the Second World War, democratization courses were held in the US and British POW camps for Germans, and reformed Germans were granted privileges based on these courses. Moreover, the U.S. Army was proud to state that the communist prisoners in American camps during the Korean War were taught what democracy stands for. Hopefully not the kind they actually set up, because it doesn't look anything like democracy. The predicted Chinese aggression manifested itself about 4 months after the war in Korea began. The Chinese entered the war after American planes had violated their airspace on a number of occasions. They actually bombed, the US bombed China. They actually went in and strafed Chinese territory several times, always in quote unquote air. They also bombed hydroelectric plants right along the border, which was vital to Chinese industry. Let's see. The question must be asked, how long would the U.S. refrain from entering a war being waged in Mexico by a communist power from across the sea, which strafed and bombed Texas repeatedly? American air power in Korea was fearsome to behold. As would be the case in Vietnam, its use was celebrated in the wholesale dropping of napalm, the destruction of villages suspected of aiding enemy, bombing cities so as to leave no useful facility standing, demolishing dams, dikes, and crippling irrigation systems, which wiped out all of the food sources, saturation bombing, scorched earth policy, and here's a quote, "You can kiss that group of villages goodbye," exclaimed Captain Everett Hundley of Kansas City, Kansas, after a bombing raid. I would say, here's another quote, "I would say that almost the entire Korean Peninsula is just a terrible mess," unquote. And here are the words of a British military general by the name of, let's see, it came out of Brassey's Annual in 1951 in a yearbook. Quote, "It is no exaggeration to state that South Korea no longer exists as a country. Its towns have been destroyed, much of its means of livelihood eradicated, and its people reduced to a sullen mass dependent upon charity and exposed to subversive influences. When the war ends, let's see, no gratitude can be expected from the South Koreans, but it is to be hoped that the lesson will be expected from, hold on, this doesn't make any sense. But it is to be hoped that the lesson will have been learned that it is worse than useless to destroy a country in order to liberate it." The wording on that is very awkward. "Certainly, Western Europe would never accept such a liberation," in quotations. Unquote. The worst of the bombing was yet to come. That began in the summer of 1952 and was Washington's way of putting itself in a better bargaining position in order to work a truce with the Soviet Union, which had been going on for a full year while the battles raged. The extended and bitter negotiations gave rise to a pervasive Western belief that if it was predominantly communist duplicity that failed to come up with a peace agreement, which of course we now see in real life happening in Ukraine, and it's blamed on Russia, but we're living through it and know unequivocally it's the UK and US that is failing to reach a peace agreement, that Russia repeatedly tried to make a peace agreement and was turned down. This is a lengthy and entangled chapter of the Korean War story, but one does not have to probe too deeply to discover the unremarkable fact that the barriers were erected by the quote unquote anti-communist side as well, which of course is the West. Syngman Rhee, for example, was so opposed to any outcome short of total victory of the entire peninsula that both Truman and Eisenhower administrations drew up plans to overthrow him, the guy they set in place as the figurehead that they groomed for the job in the United States. But again, once they put these people in power, all bets are off. And they have no problem, like they did in Vietnam with their the brothers that they installed. They have no trouble of taking them out too. And many people don't understand that. Many people say, well, oh, they cooed such and such, but then they cooed the next guy too. Why would they do that? Because the guy that they already cooed and installed is in there. And it's because many of these people either get too big for their britches or is doing a side hustle or whatever. Or in this case, again, too big for his britches. He wants the entire Korean peninsula under his control. And that wasn't what they were going for. Because again, What's the purpose of all of this? The purpose of all of this is to create a strategy of tension. They wanted it divided the entire time, because with it's divided and you're in control of the South, you can rattle the cages of the North anytime you want. And oh my God, there's going to be a war. The same reason they set up Taiwan to be able to rattle the cages with China whenever they want. This is what the strategy of tension is all about. You have to have a good guy and a bad guy. So here is a quote from the November 51 New York Times. The unadorned way that an apparently increasing number of them, meaning the American soldiers in Korea, see the situation right now is that the communists have made important concessions while the UN, as they view it, continues to make more and more demands. Oh my God, that sounds just like Ukraine. The UN truce team has created the impression that it switches its stance whenever the communists indicate they're ready to agree, moving the goalpost. At one point during the same period when the communists proposed that a ceasefire and a withdrawal of troops from the combat line should take place while negotiations were ongoing, the UN command, meaning the US, reacted almost as if they were a belligerent and said today's stand by the communist was today's stand by the communists was virtually a renunciation of their previous stated position that hostilities should continue during the armistice talks, which is exactly the opposite of what they said. Once upon a time, the U.S. fought a great civil war in which the North attempted to reunite the divided country through military force. Did Korea or China or any other foreign power send in any army to slaughter Americans, charging Lincoln with aggression? Why did the United States choose to wage a full-scale war in Korea? Only a year earlier, in 1949, the Arab-Israeli fighting in Palestine and in India-Pakistani war over Kashmir, the UN, with the American support, had intervened to mediate an armistice, not to send in an army to take sides and expand the fighting. And both these conflicts were less in the nature of a civil war than the case in Korea. If the US UN response had been the same in these earlier cases, Palestine and Kashmir might have wound up in a scorched earth Korean fate. What saved them, what kept the US armed forces out, was no more than an absence of a communist. The end. And again, this goes to the greater narrative that they were setting up at the time. It was a psyops. They are trying, they don't give a shit what happened everywhere else. They are trying to invent a boogeyman. The boogeyman is going to be the communist, and they are going to use it repeatedly in their strategy of tension. The Kashmir didn't have the necessary boogeyman that they could use at the time, so they didn't care. All right. Now, we are going to go to a couple of articles. The first one, I have to reiterate this every so often, speaking of communism. We've talked repeatedly about the World Anti-Communist League. Now, it's important in starting our Asia chapter to make sure that we understand that the World Anti-Communist League was actually set up in Taiwan. That's where it was created. So we are going to begin with the narrative of communism as the boogeyman, and we are going to ride that horse right up until it fell over dead in 91. And then we immediately shift to radical Islam. So keep that in mind.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thank you. Let me find her. Where is she? I don't see her. Did she change her?
No, she still has her regular one.
Yeah, I don't see her. Oh, there she is. Got it. She just popped up. Okay.
Hey, I'm under a Jeep, so don't worry. I'm under a Jeep. I can't participate.
Okay. Well, I loved your comment. She texted us to let us know that she may or may not be available. And she says, I might be late. Jeep and I are having a discussion. So I cracked up laughing. Obviously, the Jeep is winning the conversation right now.
Well, no, it's a dude that doesn't follow instructions because, guys are so much smarter. Okay, so I'll let you go. I'm here, I'm listening,
Okay.
Support, but
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Somebody send beer.
All right. All right. So we're going to talk first a little bit about the World Anti-Communist League from this particular article. And it talks about a couple of other organizations, and we are going to cover those organizations because they're critical as part of the Korea segment at the end. So maybe on Friday or something like that, because they're critical to the understanding of what we're talking about. All right. Obscured by a name change in the sands of time, the former World Anti-Communist League has been eclipsed. Despite relative obscurity, the organization played a significant role in the politics of the second half of the 20th century. The first of the two-part series that this is referencing, and I'll send it over to Bridget, she'll post it. This program documents the League's composition and activities with particular emphasis on the World Anti-Communist League's elements in Asia and Europe. The analysis focuses on the World Anti-Communist League as the reformation of the Hitler-Goebbels anti-Comintern of 1939 and 40. The anti-Comintern was a Third Reich-led international consortium of fascists fashioned by the Führer, meaning Hitler, and his propaganda chief. In addition to coordinating international fascist groups, it functioned as a sales tool, propaganda PR, with which the Nazis could use anti-communism to peddle their movement to conservatives. The broadcast documents the overtly fascist nature of many of the individuals and organizations involved in the World Anti-Communist League. So this is the foundation that I figured out at the very beginning of this investigation of Operation Gladio. The communist was a convenient tool for the fascist to use to disguise who they were. The communists were a cloaking device for the fascist. And they had to create a propaganda war against quote unquote communist. Even if the people weren't in fact communist, they were more into workers' rights or whatever. It didn't matter. As we've discussed with Lumumba and Allende and Chile and all of these other people that just wanted what was best for their fellow countrymen, if they didn't succumb to the fascist rule, they were labeled a communist and assassinated. And what I found interesting about this is it's actually saying that it was a continuation of World War II fascism under the guise of anti-communism. All right. With its roots in the original anti-Comintern, the American Security Council, and that's one of them that we're going to look into in a couple of days, is a key American link to the World Anti-Communist League, created by former, and I'm going to put quotes in former, FBI agents disgruntled at the demise of Senator Joseph McCarthy's quote unquote investigations. The American Security Council coalesced around the files of Harry Hung's, Jung, American Vigilant Intelligence Federation. We'll look at that one too. Young's organization was part of the original anti-Comintern prior to World War II, counting among its ranks some of the most prominent names on the right. The organization kept track of those it considered quote unquote subversive. The group shared its political intelligence with prospective employers, particularly defense contractors. Now, and this is important because this group was the beginning of private intel agencies, much like, what's the other one? The one that was in Golden Lily, that the Birch Society. The Birch Society did this exact same thing. The Third Reich veterans belonging to the European branch of the World Anti-Communist League ran a similar organization in Germany. Some of its principals had been with Goebbels' propaganda ministry and the original anti-Comintern as well. In addition to MacArthur's former intel chief, Charles Willoughby, General Charles Willoughby, one of the American Security Council most important members was another general who I've written a couple of times about, Albert Wedemeyer, Wedemeyer. He was a focal point of the China lobby. And we're going to go into the China lobby in depth, recapitulating some of the other stuff that this guy's wrote. It sets forth the links between the international fascism, the China lobby, and the Asian People's Anti-Communist League, or the APACL, which was the Asian branch of the World Anti-Communist League. And by the way, there's one of these anti-communist leagues in every region. There was one in the Caribbean, there was one in Latin America, there was one in Europe, and this is the one that's in Asia. In addition to the fascist heritage of the KMT army, which is Chiang Kai-shek's political party, the program highlights the significant participation of the Moon organization. And where is it based? In South Korea. And the Japanese war criminals that also joined the Asian People's Anti-Communist League. A guy by the name of Roichi Sagakawa and Yoshio Kodama, which we covered both of those guys in Golden Lily, which is podcast on a book called Gold Warriors. If you want to know more about them, go watch those podcasts, because those people are evil, evil, evil. Both were accused of war crimes, but freed by the US. They did in Japan exactly what they did with the Nuremberg trials in Germany, that aided and abetted all of the key Germans to escape punishment. Both of those guys, the Roichi Sagakawa and the Kodama guy, were both members of the Unification Church and the Anti-Communist League for Asia. And I want to point this out. You know, the guy that everybody thought was great, the recent Prime Minister of Japan, what's his last name? that was assassinated. For those of you who don't know, Bridget, if you wouldn't mind looking that name up real quick for me. I can see his face just as plain as day. I just can't remember his name. That guy was a huge follower of the Moon Unification Church. And just so that you know, that entire church is an Operation Gladio entity. So they are part of this whole operation. As a matter of fact, you find these Moon church members throughout all of South America, and they were guarding poppy fields in South America for growing opium. So this Moon Church is locked in step with Chiang Kai-shek and the Operation Gladio forces in Asia. And just so that you guys know, just as a reminder, in case you haven't been here before, we wait till the end to hand out microphones because this is kind of more of a lecture series of Operation Gladio and what it is. So we try to keep it to right at an hour, and then we open up for questions for about 30 minutes. At least we try to keep it to 30 minutes. We're not very good at that. One of the World Anti-Communist League's central elements, the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations, ABN, was essentially a renaming of the Committee of Subjugated Nations formed by Hitler in 1943, comprised of fascist organizations allied with Hitler, such as the Organization of Ukraine Nationalist Bandera, or OUNB, which, by the way, is still alive and well today. Also, the Hungarian Arrow Cross. The Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations advocated an anti-communist approach that not only favored the rolling back of Soviet influence throughout Eastern Europe, but the dissolution of the Soviet Union into its republics. A political goal, of the Third Reich, the eventual resolution of events in the manner favored by the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, wasn't accidental. It basically was set up for the destabilization of the Soviet Union. Isn't that crazy? Because that's exactly what the Ukrainian nationalist movement under Bandera, which is now in the form of Azov Battalion and Right Sector, is still working on the destabilization of Russia after they got their goal of this destabilization of the Soviet Union. One of the elements represented by the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations is the, wait for it, Pan-Turkish movement. Allied with Nazi Germany in World War II and fascist in nature, the Pan-Turkish movement had long sought to carve up the Soviet Union and restore the Ottoman Empire. The main contemporary vehicle for Pan-Turkism is the National Action Party and its youth wing, wait for it, the Grey Wolves. And we know unequivocally that the Grey Wolves are Operation Gladio. Founded by Alsparian Turks who advocated a wartime alliance between Turkey and Nazi Germany. Its best known members is Ahmed Ali Akka, which is the guy that tried to assassinate the Pope, and associate of the National Action Party, Ruzi Nazar, represented by the ABN, the Anti-Bolshevik Network Nations. And he actually attended the World Anti-Communist League conference in Dallas as a representative of Turkey in 1984. That's crazy shit. Next, the broadcast that this document is talking about sets forth the history of the Promethean. It's Promethean League. And we're going to talk about that too. A pre-World War II anti-communist confederation, a direct predecessor to the World Anti-Communist League. The Promethean League was based in Paris and had as its goal the breakup of the former Soviet Union. It united a number of elements that also worked for the Nazis during the war and the Anti-Communist League afterwards, including the pan-Turkish and the Ukrainian nationalist elements. The role of the American branch of the World Anti-Communist League in generating support for who? The Contras. Turk's role as a key Turkish representative to NATO, Ruzi Nasser's participation in an SS unit notorious for its extreme brutality, and cooperation between the Grey Wolf element and the Italian fascists associated with who? P2, the Masonic Lodge, that basically was a convenient tool for the Operation Gladio operatives in Italy, and their strategy of tension. The career SS veteran Theodor Oberlander, a Nazi war criminal and anti-communist league member, the extermination of the Ukraine ghetto, which happened as a part of the OUNB, because basically that was primarily all Jewish people, and they exterminated them all, which is how Bandera was trying to ingratiate himself with Hitler and Otto Skorzeny and Reinhard Gehlen in order to show his bona fides. Martin Bormann, creation of 750 corporations near the end of World War II in order to finance all of Operation Gladio via front companies. So just wanted to make you aware of this, and I'm going to put this over there. We'll be coming back to this because there's more parts to this, but I just wanted to set that tone for you guys to understand where we're going with this. So let me get this link sent out to Bridget, and then we're going to go to the next article. And this is actually, to me, just extremely interesting because this is on an actual army.mil article on their website. And it was a command historian that wrote it in 2022. 71 years ago, January 1951, the American Far East Command established its first forward base for conducting guerrilla warfare in North Korea. When the 8th Army retreated from North Korea in late 1950, it carried with it some 6,000 to 12,000 Korean irregulars who declared their willingness to fight on the side of the U.S. Indeed, many had been actively resisting North Korea control since the country was divided in 1945. Most of these irregulars fled the surprise arrival of the Chinese communists. And we've already established it wasn't surprised because the U.S. was attacking China at the border. But I want you guys, this is very important to understand when you read history. If you don't already know what the real story is, reading things like this is how they craft narratives and put out propaganda. And that's the reason why I picked this article. Many of these, let's see, they occupied defendable, friendly held islands and mainland territory along the Korean coast. The Far East Command decided to employ this force as guerrillas behind enemy lines, i.e. Operation Gladio. And for almost 3 years, these forces were trained, supported, and directed by 8th Army Secret Unit 8240. The first guerrilla units were organized, trained, and equipped on Pyong's Island, which is now, I'm going to spell this for you, Baengyeong Island. Now, keep in mind, we've already established Operation Gladio's fixation, setting up their training facilities on islands off the coast of all of these countries. They did it in the Canary Islands. They did it in Sardinia off the coast of Italy. This is a well-known practice that they do this all over. And remember, they had a whole series of them in the Keys that they used to train the Cuban exiles. So again,
Can you respell that name just one more time? Thank you.
sure. The name of the island is Baengyeong. That's the name of it now. It was back in the day spelled this way: PaengYong. It's the same island. They just renamed it because, like Formosa with Taiwan, this is a very important trick in order to hide the history. So you have to know this. One of the very first things I do when I do research is I pull up a map of the way what used to look like 1900 is kind of my trigger point. I look at 1900 maps, I look at 1930 maps, and I look at 1960 maps, because those gives you the pre-World War I, post-World War I, but not II yet, and then after World War II. And it is just fascinating to look at the differences. Okay, that island is 8 miles off the west coast of North Korea, just 17 square miles in size. The island housed more than 12,000 North Korean guerrillas formed into a company, battalion, and regimental units with logistical support, rations, training, and arms provided by the U.S. They provided a potent force for attacking and disrupting North Korean units. So this is so important, because they are actually describing, for those of us who know how to read this now, their creation of stay-behind units in the Korean Peninsula. For the remainder of the war, the guerrillas served well at their mission of deep intelligence and keeping the North Korean forces off balance. And they used the word communist, and I can't stress this enough. North Korea at the time was not communist. They had just got rid of Japan. If anything, they were more fascist in nature than communist. They were not communist. The Chinese came to their assistance because the U.S. was driving the forces towards the Chinese border. And let me just say right here something else that's very important. This is the time when they were still, Chiang Kai-shek plays heavy in all of this. So remember that Chiang Kai-shek got kicked out of China and went to Burma. He got kicked out of Burma and went to Taiwan, and the CIA set him up in Taiwan to be the world's largest drug lord. He immediately implemented martial law and ruled as a dictator for 40 years. They were not a democracy. They didn't look anything like a democracy. And all he did was change the KMT shingle out front from being an army to a political party. Nothing else changed. He was a general in charge of a captured island off the coast of China. Now, one of the things that the CIA had not given up on, which I think was a large part of the Korean War, is they wanted to insert Chiang Kai-shek back into China. And that is the reason that they were never satisfied with just allowing a unification of the Korean Peninsula under anyone other than someone they controlled, and anything that they could do to prevent it falling into the hands of someone they didn't control would have nixed them reinstalling Chiang Kai-shek back into China. China had one of the most fertile, populous, growing fields of poppy ever imagined. And they wanted that back. And the only way that they saw at this time of getting it back was to be able to push through all of North Korea up to the Chinese line so that they could install Chiang Kai-shek there and under the quote unquote KMT army, push back into China. So that had a lot to do with everything that we know about what happened in Korea as well. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind as well. Okay. It is estimated that their combat activities diverted more than 50,000 frontline troops of North Korea that might have otherwise been employed on the front line. The guerrillas also protected the western flank of Seoul and effectively defended a series of offshore islands that remained under UN control even today. Despite being located above the accepted demilitarized boundary, the guerrillas raided enemy encampments, meaning North Korean, in the rear areas, meaning up there by China. They conducted successful amphibious operations and seized even more islands. They saved more than 100 downed pilots and air crews. And while the majority of these operations took place along the west coast of northern Korea, they operated off the east as well, even holding an outpost within Wonsan Harbor until Armistice Day. Their activities, highly classified until the early 2000s, resulted in the writing of the first Army doctrine on special operations. Do you see why it's so important? The combat requirements of persons skilled in guerrilla operations, at first filled by selected World War II veterans of the Philippines and Burma guerrilla units, all of which were used in basically Operation Gladio style assassins, kidnapping, and murder, were also part of the impetus of the U.S. Army forming a special forces entity in 1952. So they used Korea as the foundational element of setting up special forces. Indeed, 99 graduates of the first 4 Special Forces training courses were selected for service in Korea with the guerrillas, making Korea the first combat employment of that new Army specialty. In addition, Ranger veterans were also assigned to advise the North Korean guerrillas, sharing their skills at raiding small commando-type activities into the villages. Unfortunately for the Army, the high classification level of the guerrilla command operations prevented any lessons learned from being realized and utilized to train future operations. That's bullshit, by the way. He's double speaking here, and let me point out why. You can't create the special forces and form the doctrine based on a war that you then say you learned no lessons from. That's bullshit. Persons who served with the unit in Korea were warned never to talk about the unit, its mission, or activities, even when some returned to the States to train the next generation of special operatives. But they had the lessons learned, whether you verbalize them or not. These are the same people that then wrote doctrine. They used that lessons learned to develop future doctrine. This is, again, horseshit. The system at the time was so inflexible that those lessons could not be realized or passed on. Bullshit. it wouldn't be until 50 years had passed before the information was declassified. The fact that it was just recently, in the last couple of decades, declassified does not mean that it was not used to develop doctrine. Some of the guerrilla forces' major successes were, and I'm going to list them here, keeping the communist forces off balance, penetrating the communist defenses with ease and regularity. Now, again, these people were not communist at this point, but they reiterate the propaganda of enforcing that we were actually fighting communists in Korea. We were fighting North Koreans and pissed off the Chinese communists because we bombed inside China, and they then began assisting North Koreans who were not communist in the war against the US aggression. So I have to point these things out to you, because when you guys go do your own research, I want you thinking about this kind of stuff, and I want you to be able to call it out. Conducting deep intel collections and operations, occupying and defending the Northwest Islands, maintaining them as UN-controlled areas, protecting the West flank. At the height of the North Korean guerrilla forces grew to a strength of 23,000 soldiers, but by 1953, both sides pursued an armistice. The guerrillas saw the handwriting on the wall with little chance of returning to their homes and families in the north. Many began to leave the ranks, and their combat incursions became less frequent. When the armistice was signed in 1953, the agreed solution for the 10,000 remaining guerrillas was to be rolled into the South's army as soldiers. Thus, the army experiment with guerrilla forces came to an end, at least in the Korean theater. Despite their work in secret, they made significant contributions, blah, blah, blah. So I wanted you guys to see what the army propaganda is about this. Now, what's our time? Okay, we're going to cover this CIA memo. This CIA memo was classified. It's about Korea, and it was dated 9 May 1953. So right around the time the armistice was signed. The subject, organization of stay behind intelligence units, North Korea. This is an official CIA document talking about stay behind units in 1953 in Korea. Here's what it says. In February 1952, the Social Security Bureau of the Ministry of Internal Affairs organized youth guard units in Pyongyang and other places in North Korea. Sound familiar? The Youth Guard unit consisted of citizens of Seoul who volunteered to join the North Korean Army during the 1950s occupation of Seoul, and former members of the South Korean Labor Party. After being investigated by the political departments of their respective army units, they were discharged from the North Korean Army to take part in stay-behind intelligence and resistance operations. Approximately 1,000 members of the Youth Guard unit were assigned to Pyongyang upon completion of a 6-month training course in a place called, let's see, can't tell if that's an X. It looks like a K, A-N-G-G-Y-E. And it gives its a code name for where it's at. In November 1952, 1 or 2 members were placed in each block in the Pyongyang and given cover jobs as drivers or factory workers. These people were used as informants by the Social Security Bureau. However, in the event of a North Korean withdrawal, they were to do the following: assist the evacuation of civilians and North Korean army troops from Pyongyang, penetrate the UN security forces which moved into the city, gather intelligence, create disorder and disturbance by covert means, assassinate any civilians who discovered their activities. That's their CIA direction. And again, this is documentation unequivocally that stay behind units was used in Asia. So that's what we have today. The next thing that we're going to go over is a little longer, and it talks about Korea 1951 to 53. So we're going to save that for tomorrow. But it only gets crazier from here. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. This is just, to me, it's totally fascinating and a completely different history than you and I learned in school. So with that, we will ask for anyone who wants to come up with a microphone.
I have a question
Sure.
for Stella, actually, if she's had an opportunity to speak with her mom.
And we did, President and I and SR71 posted a plethora of information.
I did speak with her a little bit this morning.
Hold on,
Was
hold
actually-
on.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on. Bridget, can you hear Stellar?
Sorry, I couldn't.
Okay. Stellar, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I spoke to my mom a little bit this morning and stuff. She was talking a little bit about Japan. She is, I mean, everything that we're learning about the stuff, the Koreans, or at least my mom, is completely bamboozled. She was like, after Japan left, because my mom was a young girl during that time, when Japan left, and that was the vacuum or whatever, she remembers like China and stuff. She says China's a bigger enemy than North Korea. There was no such really thing as communism. She goes, but when the Americans came in, she goes, America saved us. So that's kind of like how her and a lot of her friends still think. So I'm slowly trying to educate her a little bit.
Yeah. And of course, that is the propaganda. That is how all of this was sold. And again, from my military history, I have a master's degree in this crap. And as sometimes I walk in my office and I look at that hanging on the wall and I just want to spit on it. I mean, I spent a year learning about all of this military history, and every bit of it was a lie. Maybe the dates of when we went in and when we left were true, but every part of the context of why we were there and how we operated was a lie. There's just so much more to the story. And
she was crying. She was literally crying about the whole thing. I mean, because I guess she still remembers from when she was young and stuff like that. So it's still very traumatic, even though she's 88 years old. But she was saying that, yeah, because North Korea has all, underground is really, and, they were convinced because they did, like you were mentioning earlier, communism wasn't really a play. That wasn't what was said about the North or anything. And even now, I mean, now they are, or afterwards, but that was not what everything how you're describing literally is parallel to what she was saying. The difference is that she believes that the Americans and the West actually came to save them from the communism, and they were bamboozled to believe that the North was really bad and really in cahoots with China. And so that was what their big thing is, that that's what they were told, and that's what she still believes.
right. Okay. Did you have something else, Bridget, that you wanted to say before we go to
Sorry.
hands?
And I just wanted to apologize for talking over you. I couldn't hear you, but I was traveling while I was coming in right at the beginning of the space. And anyway, I just wanted to say we posted a ton of links for further research for any of you guys, or just for reading. Sometimes personally, I used to always joke and say I always listen to the Colonel's speeches twice. The first time without a notebook, second time with a notebook. And it just helped me to cement things in my mind so I could remember them later. Anyway, they're all here for you guys. If you don't mind, we are being shadow banned. In fact, I just got slapped on a label and on being under review. So please repost these things because they are actively trying to shadow ban us and shadow ban this information specifically from getting out. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I'm so proud of her.
Yeah, that's the first time I have a label line. I thought So I think they're kicked off, one or the other.
I was a little jealous.
Okay, so Gen X, go ahead and
Hello, Colonel. I've been in your spaces a number of times now. First, just want to express my appreciation for your time. I work in a public school. I work with high school girls in particular, and I too did. There was so much about some of these things.
you're band, you're banding a little bit. I don't know if there's a.
Gen X, you're rubber banding, sir. You're rubber banding.
Is this better?
Yeah. So you work at a high school?
And this is really valuable information. So I just wanted to thank you first for offering this, and especially in an environment where most people are running spaces, playing this high school game of followers to get paid from a platform, but you're doing this, which is probably one of the most important things of that a lot of us don't know our history properly. So I first want to thank you for that. And if I can ask two questions, there was one reference you made to Prime Minister Abe in that we thought he was a good guy. What was it about him that was not so good, if you can?
Prime Minister who?
You had made a reference to the Japanese prime minister that was assassinated.
Oh, Abe.
We thought he was a good guy.
Abe. Okay, so just so that you know, he is in. Oh gosh, were you here yesterday?
No.
Okay.
So I can go back and try and
no, I can. I just needed to know what context to put this in. So in Asian culture, specifically Japan, and then because Japan had occupied Korea, it kind of got adopted in Korea as well. There are oligarchs. There are families that run companies, and they have their own internal mafia within these companies. So all of this, one of the things that runs through all of it is the Unification Church. The Unification Church, I don't know if you know about the subway poisoning that happened. There's so much of Japanese history that wraps around the Unification Church that I was completely unaware of. And the more you dig into it, the more you realize how intertwined their politics is with this stinking church. And from our experience, what we know about this church is it's a terrorist organization disguised as a church. And the guy that assassinated him's mother had like $750,000 to $800,000 stolen from her from this church. And by stolen, I mean they're like a cult, and so they indoctrinate these people, and then they get the people to write them checks, almost from a Scientology perspective. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, where they offer these quote unquote courses for like $30,000, and you're supposedly getting higher and higher in the echelon of this, closer to Jesus, whatever kind of philosophy. And I'm kind of being flippant about it, but that's basically just from a cursory look at the Unification Church, the impression that I come away from. And so they will charge you to get blessings, basically. And as a result of that, his entire family's fortune, I mean, they were very well off, was gone in a very short period of time. And that's the reason why, according to many sources, that he shot Abe, is because he is one that went around using his political stature, advocating for Japanese people to affiliate with the Unification Church. It would be like our president telling everybody they had to be a Catholic. If they were going to get government jobs, if they were going to be embraced by, so that's kind of the equivalent of the research that I've done and how that all happened.
And,
Wow.
and
I-
put
I
a
really
link to the unification church up in the net if you wanted more information.
Yeah, and I appreciate the receipts as well. I have a question around the left behinds. You've referenced that several times, and I think maybe it's a bigger one. I see a lot of hands, so I'm going to go back and listen to the first one.
So let me correct you. They're called stay behinds.
Stay
No,
behinds.
yeah. Stay behinds is an entity that was formed in 1942 in Germany by Reinhard Galen. Otto Skorzeny was the trainer for them. And basically the concept was they were going to create stashes of weapons and trained assassins, or combat guerrillas, whatever you want to call them. They're all the same thing, in all of the Axis territory that they conquered as they conquered it, so that if at any time Russia, the Soviet Union, or the US or Brits or whoever was to try to take that territory back from them, these people would rise up from behind and attack. That concept was first learned during the Boer Wars by the Brits, when they were down in the southern part of Africa. And Winston Churchill, who was a reporter, saw them use that tactic and brought that back to Europe as a tactic that they used universally throughout. Like that was like in 1899. And so from then on, that became a tactic used in warfare. And Reinhard Galen and Otto Skorzeny was his trainer. And so they began doing that throughout the Axis territory, all of it, in 1942, which would have explained them knowing about that concept in Korea, because Japanese also used that concept because they were part of the Axis forces. So that's what a stay behind unit is. And throughout Europe, there was like 600 of those sites in Italy alone. And Turkey, which is why I talked about the gray wolves, it would have not been as appreciative of you if you didn't know this history. Gray wolves were the stay behind units in Turkey, and Turkey had the biggest program bar none. So they had more than 600 units, and they used them. They dressed up as a pretend somebody. And like, for example, in Turkey, they dressed up as Kurds and they would attack their fellow citizens. Like they'd burn entire cities of their own fellow citizens down, dressed up as Kurdish people, in order to then justify an attack on the Kurds. This was done all over Europe, to their own domestic population for domestic control. This is where domestic terrorism arises from. So let's.
Colonel, I'm going to step down, but again, thank you so much.
Sure.
I had a grandfather in the Korean War. Didn't really spend very much time with him, so I appreciate all your talks about Gladio in particular. So I look forward to future ones. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
And,
Texas.
and just to let you know, I also put a link in the net that has a link to all of her recorded spaces, as well as all of her threads. If you are looking to catch up on, a missed one, or look at some of the other ones, they're also labeled by area. Thank you.
Texas.
Thank you,
Texas, Annie, you're next.
Hi, thank you, Colonel, and thanks for letting me speak in this. Like Gen X said, it wasn't my grandfather, but my father was in the Korean War, but he was stationed in Germany as a tank driver. And well, I wasn't born until 1960, but when my sister and I were young, she was born in 58. Of course, we were nosy kids, so I was digging in the closet, and we found these photographs, like some of the tanks and some things. And we saw this one of this, like a lady that was almost crucified, but it looked like she was naked and had her breasts cut off. I mean, cut clean off, and was burned. And I was always wondering, was up with that.
Well, if
I
she's
did
burned,
want to ask my dad, but you know, he'd yell at us for digging in his stuff. But
if she was burned, it was probably napalm. They used napalm quite a bit in Korea.
why? Well, he was in Germany. I don't know what he was doing.
Well,
Maybe he was
again,
thinking-
he may not have been in Germany. That may be the story. If he is one, if he was assigned to one of these classified locations, you would not know it.
yeah. And the lady, why did they cut off her breasts? That was
Because
weird.
they torture them for them to rat out their neighbors.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that picture always kind of haunted me, even though like we were raised in a funeral home and I saw some nasty things, but that was particularly nasty.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'll sit down.
Sure. Jillian?
Hey, Colonel, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, and Cousin It and Bridget, and hey, Stellar. I won't take long because I know you got a lot of hands. But thanks for explaining about the PM, the Japanese Prime Minister, because I always wondered what happened there. He always seemed to have a close relationship with Trump. Maybe that was all perception, but since that's what everything is these days. But I liked him, but that explains a lot. So thank you.
Sure.
And I have a friend, my father has passed recently. He wasn't in Korea, but his good friend was, who is still alive. So I'm going to try to get him he didn't talk much about Korea. He was like, we really weren't there for the right reason. And he mentioned napalm, so he may talk about it a little bit, but maybe I can get some first account stories from him, because that's the best kind. But
It is. And that's very important, Jillian. And thank you for bringing that up, because these people are not going to be with us for very much longer. If you know people that was stationed in Korea, I think it's vital to understand that. But what I really think is critical, two things. First of all, we have to know the history for what it really is. And when you're talking to people about it, there are some people who still today were there and have no idea that they were there for the wrong reasons. And there is a risk that you run in talking to people about this subject based on their openness to know the truth. And you have to be very cognizant of their openness, because the last thing you want to do is ruin what little bit of life they still have left. But if they're open to it, listening to things that they experienced, and you can come away from that, even if you don't confront them with the truth, and contextualize the information that they got, and maybe some of that then makes the rest of this make sense.
Exactly. And he was with the UN Army, whatever that. What did they do? Just take the American Army and put a UN uniform on them?
So no, we don't wear another uniform. The one time that they tried doing that, they actually tried to court-martial somebody because he refused to put it on, because we're not supposed to ever have another uniform on. So what they called it, because the UN was brand new, they called it a UN effort, and all they got was onesies and twosies from like 13 other countries. We covered it a little bit yesterday in our first series of this Korean thing. But basically, they had like a handful of people from the UK, a handful of people from France, and a handful of people from West Germany, and then called it a quote unquote UN mission. It was not a UN mission. Basically, the only people that was there was American.
Right. Okay. Well,
but they called it a UN.
Yeah, I'll try to reach out to him, and he's really in good health. So I better, yeah. You just never know once they get their age. You know, it's just. But thanks for all you guys.
Thank you. All right, Patriot.
I mean, my best class, I thought, for Korean history was MASH, which is a joke.
Yeah.
I didn't learn much. Where I went.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Patriot Sarah Storm. Who's got their, please
So
mute.
thank you, Colonel.
Jillian,
Thank you.
hold on a
Bridget.
second.
Thank you, Cousin Ed.
There you go. All right.
Oh, am I talking on
No,
top of you?
go ahead. You're fine.
So I don't know whether this question is a good, a good question for this space. But my parents supported a Korean child during the 60s and 70s, and I think that was through through World Vision, but I'm not sure. So I always thought that was a good thing to do, but since I'm learning about this, what do you think about that?
Every one of
Thank
these,
you.
every one of these organizations that I've looked into are nothing more than the CIA and the U.S. government and organizations like the WWF fleecing us of our wealth. That almost none of them have anything to do with the actual children. In many cases, the children doesn't exist. I'll be happy to take a look at World Vision, but yeah, I would never recommend anyone do any of this stuff if you don't, or if you're not dealing with someone who is the actual missionary that are going over there and you're physically handing your money to that missionary. I would not recommend you do any of that stuff, especially on anything that's online or anything else, because what I have found, even with like the Sierra Club, most of these organizations that they're all tied to the international syndicate. It's just a way of stealing our money. So I don't recommend any of them.
So, sorry. We would get get these letters from these children. Do you think that was real or fake, or I don't know now.
I mean, they could have had their own, like the ambassadors, like children's school, these international schools that are over there. They could have had them writing the letters. I don't know. I know the kind of letters you're talking about because I've seen them. I had a neighbor that did that exact same thing. But again, I've just found that if you don't know someone who's had their feet in these places, in these countries, do not do it. Like we donated school supplies when I was at Air War College. When we went to Vietnam, we took bucket loads of supplies over there to the schools, but we actually, and that was a requirement, we actually had to physically go to the schools and give them to them ourselves. There was nobody in the middle. So that's what I recommend.
Thank you for your time.
Sure. Lexi?
Hi, thank you for bringing me up. My name is Lexi. I'm from Japan, and I was reading the article, one of the article on the Jumbotron. I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I talk to a lot of Americans. I live in the United States right now. So, people ask me about Abe's assassination, and what the Americans, my friends, know is a false, as what the Jumbotron said. I read, speak, hear Japanese because Japanese is my first language. And it happened July the 8th. That was assassination. But this Tetsuya Yamagami is a scapegoat. So he was hired by Unification in Soka Gakkai. Soka Gakkai is another cult. And those tiny little handmade gun just made a big noise. So when Abe tried to look back on his left side of the building, there's a sniper. So he got two shots, sniper shot on his right side of the throat. So it was live because back then I had a Japan TV. It was just a live. Live, so I was watching, and I saw him. Went to the ambulance, went to the top of the building, and lifted up by helicopter. The sheet was all red, and then it got there at hospital, and then I think he stayed 5 hours until Akie, the wife, came. So what the Japanese government is hiding is that Abe found out what's in this COVID vaccine, which is bioweapon. He found what was in it. So he wanted to use ivermectin, but Pfizer and Soka Gakkai has a relationship. Soka Gakkai has Pfizer's stocks, and then Bill Gates and Pfizer and Soka Gakkai brought the bioweapon to Japan. And knowing that we all know that follow the money, if the Japan government uses ivermectin, everything's going to screw up. So they decided to assassinate him. That the day he wasn't supposed to be there, ma'am. He was supposed to be in a different state, but the night before, which is close to the midnight, Soka Gakkai or Unification Church, or who wanted to assassinate him, called that Yamaguchi Prefecture top police department, say he's coming. He changed the location. And then openly, that area was open, surrounded by buildings. So it's easy target. So having changed that like 6-7 hours before, the prefecture was able to provide only 2 bodyguard, and he brought some. But if you see the videos, they're all surrounded by Soka Gakkai, which is the enemy, which is they know what's going to happen. So when Yamagami shot the fake noise, a lot of people went down. If I was his bodyguard, I would cover him right away. Nobody covered him. It's in the paperwork. I know second top Soka Gakkai, who is now trying to stop this bioweapon in Japan. He speaks out in spaces, and I really want to have an interview with him. But Soka Gakkai is a very cult. If I say something, let's say if I'm a doctor, if I say, okay, that's a bioweapon, mRNA is not going to do anything, they come after you and kill. They really do. So Abe was assassinated by snipers. I think that sniper was part of the Unified Church, because the guy who owns Japan Times, Washington Times, not Washington Post, Washington Times in Washington, D.C., is a friend of Eric Trump. The third son is close to Eric Trump. So they do promote a machine gun and all that. And this guy, Bun Seimei, was prohibited coming into Japan. But 3-4 days before the assassination, or actually June 30th, he entered Japan. Why? Because the government allowed him to do that. So it's all hidden. And then a doctor who saw Abe had a press conference. I was watching it. It was about 2 hours. He said there was 2 shots from the right side of the throat. One went through from the left arm. The other one went to the heart. So it was instant death. Somebody asked, did you see some wound from the back? He said, no, because it was just he's a scapegoat. He made a noise, pay attention to the back. That's why he got shot by a sniper. I don't know the sniper. It came from Washington, D.C. or U.S. base. We don't know, because all these interview with the live conference of the doctor, it's deleted it, and I don't even know he's alive or not. We don't hear from him. So that's the true story. I'm still able to try to get what was in it with the paperwork from the second top of Soka Gakkai. He is trying to really stop and then get the compensation from the government. He's trying to crush Soka Gakkai, which is the cult and a very bad cult. And Sanctuary is a came from North Korea, now in South Korea. Abe was sending Japanese people's tax money. So he hated it. I hated him. So he stole ODJ money, $60 billion over the last 10 years or so. He assassinated so many movie stars and singers since 2020. That's the story. So I know some people don't know, and I don't mean to intrude. I don't mean to disrespect. I do that to the Japanese people. If they bring some propaganda from the United States, I come in and yell, like, you need to dig the source. Like, that's not true. So I do both ways. So I just want everybody to know that Abe was assassinated by snipers. I believe it's the sanctification hired by Soka Gakkai, but Soka Gakkai didn't like him because he wanted to use ivermectin. So I'm sure Bill Gates used somebody, Bill Gates has a lot to do with a Pfizer in Japan too. So I mean, I can try to get that guy. He only speaks Japanese. I can do the space, but I have to be really careful. So, but that's the true story.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really didn't mean to.
No, we appreciate
I
it.
really didn't. I just wanted you to know the truth.
No,
Because
I
see
appreciate
those
it.
propagandas. I don't like propagandas.
So-
Sorry.
What I
Thank you so much, Lexi.
Yeah, what I
Thank you so
find
much.
interesting about this is there's several things that, because we look for patterns for verification, because of course, we're not able to be all of these different places. And so when things fit patterns, it gives more validity. And let me just point out a few things, because this is very instructive to everybody that's in the space and is going to be looking at the space. Let me tell you a couple of things that she just talked about that are patterns. When she said that Abi's agenda was changed 7 hours before the assassination, that is critical, because when JFK was assassinated, his agenda changed as well. He was supposed to go straight down the Central Avenue in Dallas, Texas. And at the last minute, because a change of venue, he was directed around the Dealey Square. Okay. So those types of changes tells you that they have already set up the sniper's nest and they're going to vector him directly into it. So that's an incredibly important point. Also, motive. She gave you a motive. We also know, and another pattern, any other president that wanted to use alternative methods to COVID. Remember the guy in Tanzania? Remember the Haitian president? All of them assassinated. So another pattern. So those are the things that when you hear people's information, it's incredibly important that we already have a foundation that is based in fact and historical relevance, because you then create a filtering system for yourself to be able to say, she's full of crap, or holy crap, that looks like the same pattern that we've seen here, here, and here. And that's the reason why I have spent the last several months taking you around the world illustrating to you how these operations work. It's not for my health. As a matter of fact, it's probably detrimental to my health. It is so that you can create your own filtering system. And we are doing this together. We're learning all of this together. And I appreciate Lexi coming in and sharing that with us, because then we're able to just.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right. CIC, go ahead. Thank you for being patient. Keck Live Matter. Yeah. Go ahead. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, Colonel, I have a few questions. First, wanted to thank you for your service to our country. I just have a few questions. I was born in 1968, and I believe you said that's when Gladio was launched.
No, Gladio was started in 1942.
Oh, okay.
By the
Gotcha.
Nazis, and then it moved on to when NATO was stood up, it was incorporated into NATO.
Okay. Well, my question that I was trying to get to is it's actually about the Q Intelligence Board. And it has to do with Drop 11. And I want to know that if our military law of war manual had been rewritten and there would possibly new rules of engagement, how would our military be able to use what was normally used against the people to take over the control? How Gladio, it deceives and tricks people. Would our military be able to use that, but not for bad, but for good? And then also Drop 11 says, and this was posted on 2017 in the 10th month and the 29th day. That was October 29th in 2017, when the military law war manual was in fact revised initially. And so, but the drop says key information or key, and the key that's stating this is the key: military intelligence versus FBI, CIA, and no such agency, which they go by NSA, and they're all under NDA. So they're not allowed to disclose anything, and everything is always redacted, and we never get any real truth because everything's constantly redacted. But it appears to me that the military intelligence has some data that it's a versus FBI, CIA, and no such agency. And so it just appears, and just so I'm wondering, in my collective thought of reviewing everything that I've seen lately, would our military be able to use Gladio, but for a good reason and not a bad reason, is my question.
So, have you ever been in the military?
My father served in Vietnam. He enlisted, or he was drafted in 70.
No, I just meant you personally. Have you ever had any military training?
No, I was
Okay.
raised by Vietnam.
It's not a bad thing. I just want to know how to answer your question.
He went on with a career of 30 years in the black hole in Boeing. So
Okay.
he built airplane parts
Okay.
that he wasn't allowed to talk about.
Right. Okay.
And I know about people that aren't allowed to talk.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
raised my question specifically to have it be speculative.
I got that. I just want to know how to answer it based on your frame of reference and whether or not you've been in the military. What's important to understand about Operation Gladio is it is a paramilitary force that has been used in order to install fascist international regimes around the world for an international syndicate to control resources. Now, they do it in many different tactical and operational level ways. There is in every psyops, in every operation, in every war, because this is a war, even if it's just the information war, although this is very physical when it comes to assassinations, there is always the ability to turn the tables on those conducting it. So let me just give you an example. We have unequivocally shown over the course of time that one of their best tactics is to infiltrate. For example, the CIA puts people in corporate structures through infiltration in order to manipulate and orchestrate certain events. Now, if you have ever read anything about, hold on a second, I'm going to have a momentary. In Chicago, they had a basically sting that was done by the White Hats that went in, and it took about 7 years. They infiltrated all of the Black Hat operations across the board in all of Chicago. Gray Lord. And that's the name of the operation. And in doing so, they turned the tables. They did to them what they had been doing to the good guys. And 7 years of this, where
that was my question:
and I'm answering it.
So it is possible.
Yes, I'm answering it, and I'm giving you an actual example of it. So, but I want you to understand, because this next part's very important. It took them in a large city, but a very small jurisdiction when you look at the entire world. It took them 7 years to, and it was very compartmentalized. For example, a white hat appearing to be a black hat, dirty DA has to be hired. They have to take bribes. They have to be coerced into doing things that they're not supposed to do. A judge has to be hired, appointed. All of these things take time. And so over the course of those 7 years where all of these people were put into places and maybe coerced somehow because they had blackmail on them too, and so they were given lesser sentences at the end of the day for turning state's evidence, blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff happened. It took about 7 years. Once they made and by the way, the person that was a white hat pretending to be a black hat that may have been the judge didn't know that the prosecutor was the same situation, because it was so compartmentalized and so classified as to who was what, so that no one could out anyone else if they were tortured. So it's very strict as far as who knows who. And very few people at the very top even knew it was going on. So at the end of the 7 years, once they had the entire network mapped out, they made the arrest. It took about 48 hours to round everybody up. They had trials, blah, blah, blah. So that just happened in 2019 in Southeast Italy, where they did basically a very similar roundup of a major CIA / Intel / Operation Gladio network was taken down there, over 300 people. So these things have been done, but what everyone needs to understand is the length of time. And we're talking Southeast Italy, the area in which this one cartel operated, mafia, was approximately the size of like Georgia and Florida. And so when you have those small entities as part of these major, this is an international syndicate. It has operated since 1948 that we know of. And there are tons and tons of people involved. And so any amount of effort to do that, and I believe it's been ongoing for quite some time, well before Trump was even elected president in 2016, that there was an effort being made to map this organization. And so, yes, I believe that. It's the whole reason I'm doing what I'm doing, because I believe all of us needs to understand the breadth and the depth of this in order to be able to, when that shit hits the fan, to be able to let everybody else know what is happening, why it's happening. We will be the voice of reason, and we are going to have the evidence behind us, that all you have to do is set your neighbor down and hit play. You're going to have an entire library when we get done of this happening all over the world, and for people not to panic, because it's just getting cleaned up. It's not like it just happened. It's been happening since 1948. And it's happened way before that, just 1948 under the guise of Operation Gladio. We started off this entire series by going through incidences like in Hawaii and the Philippines, where it was done in the late 1800s and early 1900s, just was not done by our government. World War II changed that when it set up the UN, NATO, and all of these intel agencies, in addition to the CIA. And that is when they took what used to be done by the mafia and all of these criminal syndicate people in big business that would go in and overthrow governments, and put it all in the government under the auspices of the CIA. So that's kind of just a little bit of history. So thank you for the question.
Okay, that pretty much kind of sums it up. And so with that being said, and then also on top of that, I have an understanding specifically from my father, because he'd come home when I was a little kid, man, and I'd show him what I built with my Legos. And I really wanted to impress my dad, and he'd cry because he wanted to show me what the hell he was building. He wasn't able to do it, man. I would bring him to tears every single time I showed him my stuff. It would make him cry. And so I understand that you're not allowed to say things, man. And my papa, he served in the Vietnam War, and then he got out in 1968 or 69, a year after I was born. He married my mother, and he made sure she was protected from the man who bore me as a child. And he was not a good person of good character. And so my father, he took it upon himself to raise me through the adoption, the true adoption. And he taught me a lot of real good, wise things. And one of them was to shut my mouth when I, need to shut my mouth. I should just keep quiet and pay attention and pick up on the stuff I'm missing. He taught me how to do that.
Well, hopefully we're giving you some of the stuff that you may have missed in school. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I just want to say that I understand, my papa, he would have loved to have been able to explain it, but he wasn't allowed to.
Right. Right.
He wasn't
exactly.
allowed to.
Thank you.
But he had a way of showing me without saying it. Kind of like the Socratic method, where you ask it.
Yep.
You say what you're trying to say, but you only say it in question form.
Right. Yeah.
That causes you to think about it. So my pop started me out a long time ago that way.
Thank you.
So, yeah. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to say, I'm not here for a popularity contest. And I start getting too popular, I will delete my account and start a new one. People seem to like me for who I am, not
Cool.
by how many followers I have. So,
Okay, well, let me move on because I got more questions and I need to get off here. So thank you again for being here. Jeff, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to tell Lexi, thank you for delivering the information about the ambassador in Japan.
That was the
it would
prime
seem
minister, not the ambassador.
That's what I meant to say, the prime minister, correct. It would seem that Robert F. Kennedy was shunned by the Democrat Party for holding the ivermectin hydroxychloroquine argument against Dr. Fauci, and his throat was cut for that. But my question to you, Colonel, is considering General MacArthur's fallout in the Philippines in the Bataan Death March, which was something that tortured him for his entire life, do you think he personally took it out on the Koreans because of the Bataan Death March? It seemed like he had something personal against the Asians. Just my opinion.
No, I do not. I have spent a lot of time on General MacArthur, and General MacArthur was a very I'm going to use the word egotistical, but it's probably not the exact right word. He liked yes men. He did not want anyone telling him how to do anything. And that's why Willoughby ended up being his, Willoughby was not an intel officer. If I remember right, he was a logistics officer, and he was a suck up. And that's the reason why MacArthur was told repeatedly by his other intel guy that what he wanted to do was wrong. And he got so pissed off at that guy that basically he brought in a completely unqualified officer who was a suck up in to be his intel. And basically Willoughby, whatever MacArthur wanted to do, he did whatever he wanted to do. So I don't know what real regret he had. He got exactly what he wanted by having a suck up for an intel person, when much of the harm after the initial taking of the Philippines by Japan was incurred by MacArthur's need to be right about everybody and hiring about everything and hiring yes men instead of competent, qualified people. So that's my take on it.
So the Incheon landing, which was a terrible maneuver that almost cost a lot of our Americans' lives when China came across the border, was that his intel guy that you just mentioned? Was that partially his fault, or was that all MacArthur?
MacArthur hired the guy. MacArthur's the commander. He has 100% of the responsibility. Everything that happened after MacArthur retreated from the Philippines, to include, because he took Willoughby with him to Japan when he was the basic military governor of Japan. Willoughby was right there by his side as his intel. Everything that happened from the minute they left the Philippines, while he was in Australia, while he went to Japan, was 100% MacArthur's responsibility, because he hired nothing but disqualified yes men to tell him what he wanted to be told, because he was going to do it anyway. Bridget?
Yeah, Colonel, thank you. Sounds
Sure.
like a DEI hire.
Go ahead, Bridget.
I'm jumping backwards a little bit again to say thank you to Lexi for bringing us firsthand, and we love it when people can come into these spaces and give us, like we have had in the past with Cuba, and we have had in the past with Venezuela and other countries that have physically firsthand been there to witness these scenarios happen. And we all know that, or if you've been following this on this journey and we're pointing to these patterns, we're using history and their patterns to lead us to logical conclusions about what's going on right now, because it's the same people using the same tactics. And I was very quickly able to find an article that showed exactly what she said, which is that they did change his schedule at the last minute. Again, just like, we see these patterns over and over. And then the other one comes with using our Gladio classes, because again, normally we don't find the truth out about these until later on, years later, when the declassified documents do come out. So we use these patterns. And when I went in and looked up ABBA on vaccines, I came up with 15 articles immediately that said, debunked, lies. No, it didn't happen. And it's like, well, what did that tell you? It did happen. That's exactly what it was. She's absolutely right. Yeah. When you look at it with your Gladio glasses on, you see exactly. And she must be spot on, because looking at those headlines, they wouldn't be screaming about something if it didn't bother them. It's when you hit a nerve that they start screaming, no, didn't happen, wasn't there, didn't happen. But anyway, and again, just wanted to say thank you, and thank you, Colonel, for we can do all the research, cousin and you do the research, but you put it in bite-sized pieces where it sticks with us, and it's digestible, and you take it with you, and it changes the way you view everything, and break from that brainwashing that we have all received throughout our lifetime to see past and through their lies.
Got it. All right. Let's see. Real Pastor had his hands up. Did you have a question or a comment? His hand went down.
Yeah, he might. Oh. Real Pastor?
Yes, Colonel Towner. Once again, I want to thank you for your service and, taking yourself out of the equation to put yourself out there for other people so that they can understand. And I think that that's really honorable of you to kind of remove your, and so that other people can come to the knowledge of certain things. And that's great, because that's how the Socratic method works. I'm learning that. But I just wanted to say, I'm not here for a popularity contest. I just want to get the truth out. So I tithe all my money to Pastor Donald J. Trump, because without him, we're not going to have a church. So, or freedom to speak, or anything. So, real Pastor Donald J. Trump deserves all of my, all glory to real Pastor Donald Trump, not me. I'm not here for myself. I'm here to educate people, help them. Not educate, just kind of help them, because I want people to know that some people can kind of see, other people can't really see really well. Once you start digging into what you've already seen, I'm sure, before, and just comb past it, you'll start to see it make maybe a little bit more sense. I pray and I hope. That's
why we're here. We're going to make it all make sense. We're not going to necessarily like it.
And that's why I thank you for your service. I trust my gut on what I do. I go with what my gut tells me, not with what my brain tells me.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have to connect my mind.
Okay. I don't know. Something's happening to the microphone. Sunshine, did you have, I don't see your hand up. Did you have a
did, but the question was answered by somebody else. So
okay.
If you want to put me down for someone else, go ahead.
No,
that was answered.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that we had you up here if you had a question. Okay, guys, our time's up. And I appreciate everybody being here. We will be back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and we're going to take another bite of the Korean apple and keep going through this until we get what I feel is a very firm foundation as our springboard to go around the west of Asia. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you guys. Love
Thanks,
you.
Stellar.
Oh, don't
Thank
forget
you, Donald. Thanks, guys.
Oh yeah, that's right. Kimmy's having a space with Ivan. If you guys are available tonight, Kimmy's having a space with Ivan Raiklen. If you guys are available, and I know you guys just had a kick-ass one over the weekend with him. And if people don't know that, you guys got to go listen to her interview with Ivan. You guys are gonna love it.
Yeah, it is a very unique interview with him that is more about his overall approach than what you would normally get when he does these long form interviews. We did that. It's over on the Colonel's Corner on our Rumble channel. That's what it's called, the Colonel's Corner. And it's a kick-ass interview, if I do say so myself. I really enjoyed doing it. So anyway, what time does that start, Stellar?
I believe it's at 5 o'clock our time here. So 8 o'clock.
8
your
o'clock.
time.
Okay. All right. We're gonna
So
try
I
to
would
be
love
there.
to have you guys in.
All right.
And Frog is having also, since the speech went on late, he was rescheduled, didn't he, for tonight?
Yeah, but I think he forgot that he was co-hosting for Kimmy tonight. So I think that he'll be doing that. And tomorrow's the Into the Fight group. So with his dementia and everything, it's because what's his excuse? It's because I'm working. So yeah, it's because he's working. So probably Thursday or Friday, I'm sure.
Yeah, and tomorrow night at 9:30, we will be doing the Alpha Warrior show as well. So anyway, all right, fun times. Thank you all for being here.
I love your guys' spaces with Alpha. I always get the tapes afterwards because of the Into the Fight. But yeah, I love your guys' spaces with him. They're always fire too.
Yep.
Just love you guys. You have no idea. You guys are like my heroes. I mean, total heroes for connecting all these. And I'm sure that you're heroes with a lot of other people that's helping us to see through all this fog, and being able to put everything to perspective, just like that young lady, Lexi, I believe was her name. I mean, just amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Stellar, I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree more with what you just said.
Thank you all. I am very humbled by that. And I have told both Bridget and Cousin Ed a million times, my obligation, you guys paid for my education. You paid for my service. My obligation is to give that back to you guys in the only way that I can, given the current circumstances. And that is to bring you this information. And so we're committed to doing it, and we're going to do it until we've got our country back. So with that, we're out. See you guys tomorrow. What are you doing? Huh? You being a vegetable, Daddy? You being a vegetable? Huh? You being a vegetable, Daddy? You being a vegetable. Being a vegetable with Daddy.